Ugh. Pathologic 2 is an adventure survival game developed by Russian studio Icepick Lodge. The first game shipped with 3 playable characters, the Bachelor, the Haruspex and the Changeling, whereas Pathologic 2 features only the Haruspex. Icepick Lodge are planning to release the other 2 routes for Pathologic 2, but there's no news of exactly when it will happen. Now you might be asking yourself, is Pathologic 2 a sequel, a prequel, a reboot, a reimagining? The answer is yes. And the great thing is that it doesn't even matter all that much. Pathologic 2 acknowledges that the first game happened, but only for self-referential and meta purposes. This takes us to the mind-bending intro, which serves both as a tutorial and a way to introduce players to the world. In both Pathologic games, you have 12 days to save the city from a deadly plague. Pathologic 2 starts at the end of a failed run, or at the end of the first game, or the second, or something. So you're dropped into a theater turned into a makeshift hospital, and you get to take a stroll through the town as the consequences of your actions unfold around you. Citizens are executed by the military, soldiers torch plague victims, bodies litter the streets. You know, the usual. You reach the cathedral and after a brief conversation with the theater director, you get the chance to try again. This game's weird. And then the game proper starts. Or does it? Whatever the case, you play as Artemi, a surgeon who returns to his hometown from the big city after being summoned by his father, the local doctor. You then wake up in what appears to be a freight train right next to some coffins. A man gets out of one of those coffins and invites you to play a game of dice, as one usually does. I should stop making that fucking joke. What follows is a sequence of dreams, one trippier than the other. You wake up in a field with giant cows and talking bird people. You are then taken to the steppe where this dude challenges you to a fist fight and teaches you how bartering works by exchanging hearts. And then, as soon as you step off the train, you're attacked by a group of goons. Apparently, people believe you killed your own father despite you not being physically present in the city when his murder occurred. Of course. Anyway, you 360 no-scope those fuckers and then the game starts for real. What a relief. I usually don't talk about tutorials, but Pathologic 2's tutorial stands out because it does a great job of introducing players to the revolving door of creepy shit and supernatural phenomena that make up the entirety of the game's 20 or so hour runtime. It teaches the basic gameplay mechanics like bartering and looting and teases some of its themes as well. It's great. So let's take a step back and talk presentation and world. Pathologic 2 takes place in a nondescript Russian small town known simply as Town on Gorkon. It's located somewhere in the Eurasian steppe. I couldn't let this geographical ambiguity pass. So, after extensive research and getting several PhD degrees in the relevant fields at the world's top universities, I managed to pinpoint the town's approximate location to somewhere in this 8,000 kilometer stretch of land. Anyway, the town culture sports a mix of Russian culture not long before the 1917 revolution as well as the ancient traditions of the steppe people. From the outside it looks like an early 20th century European town, but look closer and you'll see tapestries, tribal paintings and other vestiges of the steppe culture that once dominated the area. It really sells this idea of a city with one foot in the past and one foot in the future, of a city in a transitional period where two cultures with wholly different mindsets and beliefs are in a constant tug of war for dominance. This is actually one of the themes addressed by Pathologic 2, and I have to say it's rare for a game to convey its themes so well through the visuals alone. The inhabitants are just as diverse. You'll see turn-of-the-century gentlemen, factory workers, shop owners, steppe people in traditional garments, Eastern Promises rejects. Speaking of which, the facial animations are something special. They may be minimalistic from a technical standpoint, but the subtle facial gestures make up for it. The character models do veer into uncanny valley, but I'm sure that was intentional. Pathologic 2 has a suffocating, oppressive atmosphere that will get under your skin as soon as you boot up the game. There are several elements that contribute to this. First, there's the labyrinthian design of the city. The streets loop around in unnatural ways. Dead ends and choke points are everywhere. Doors and entryways are not where you'd expect them to be, forcing you to take detours through dark alleyways. In many ways it reminds me of The Shining's Overlook Hotel. There's an excellent video explaining how Kubrick played with spatial awareness to disorientate viewers, if you want to check it out. I'm curious whether Pathologic 2 really used this technique or if I'm reaching. Anyway, the result was that even after 10 hours of Pathologic 2, when I was 100% sure that the game doesn't rely on jump scares and other cheap horror tactics, I still felt as if something was following me, ready to pounce at me at any moment. And you know what's weird? There are no monsters in Pathologic 2. It's not that kind of game. But the city, with its clash of modern and ancient, relatable and alien and disjointed layout, makes me feel like an intruder. As if it's a living organism that is trying to eject me. And as it turns out, the districts are named after bull organs, with the city itself being shaped like a bull. Why a bull? Well, I'm gonna leave that up to you to discover. But that's just one of many ways Pathologic 2 fleshes out its atmosphere. The sound in general is incredible. The voice acting, for instance, is interesting. Characters don't talk like normal people. The best way to describe it is stage play-like.
Whichever finger bleeds, the whole hand aches.
Sow an act and you reap a habit. Sow a habit and you reap a character. Sow a character and you reap a destiny.
A sound steward doesn't fear mice. He doesn't fear anyone.
Then there's the soundtrack. It's a mix of drone-based ambient, eerie electronica in the vein of The Knife, and tribal music, with chants, sitars and the like. Let's have a listen. Pathologic 2 has a haunting soundscape that, much like the gameplay, fills players with this sense of constant dread and gloom. There's a lot of attention to detail, like how drawers creak when opened and herbs emit specific sounds depending on their type. One time while I was rummaging through trash in game, I was startled by what sounded like a falling trash can. I was ready to go outside and defend my IRL trash cans from stray cats when I heard it again. At which point I realized the noise came from the game, and it just stays there. No explanations offered. I couldn't for the life of me locate the source of the noise. It could be either a hobo digging around for day-old kebabs or a clipping recording session. Your guess is just as good as mine. The presentation's not flawless though. Character models for bandits, shopkeepers, and even some secondary characters are recycled way too often. I recall talking with a clerk and two separate shopkeepers one after another and seeing the same model. The engine can handle small areas with lots of particle effects, so expect the occasional stuttering. The combat animations are laughably janky, but I'll address this in the gameplay section of the video. So the game still needs more work. Fortunately, the surreal visuals and creative art direction make up for the lack of polish. When a game has me talking to rat people and extracting organs from Russian Uncle Fester, I'm more than happy to forgive any technical shortcomings. Pathologic 2 has a simple premise. You're a surgeon and you have 12 days to banish the plague. Your job is made harder with each subsequent day. As more people get sick, violence and looting erupt in infected districts and the town's economy slowly collapses. Your job is to research and create a cure for the plague, and tend to as many people's needs as possible, whether medical or of another nature. And in true survival game fashion, you have a bunch of biological needs to manage. Now, what makes Pathologic 2 different from your run-of-the-mill survival game? In many of those games, the survival elements become less relevant as the player advances through the tech tree. If the player needs to manage hunger, for instance, the game will usually offer a perk or an upgrade of some sort that decreases the rate at which it advances, and so on and so forth until you reach a point where survival takes a backseat role. What was initially a core gameplay mechanic, a vital part of the early game experience, becomes a chore that you sometimes remember to do when the screen turns red or whatever. Not here. In Pathologic 2, survival is a constant uphill battle. The player must manage a variety of biological needs to stay alive, which include hunger, thirst, exhaustion, and health. The problem is that these needs are intertwined to the point that you can't satisfy one without negatively affecting others. Take hunger. Hunger can be sated with food, but some foods contain large amounts of salt, which will naturally increase thirst. Exhaustion can be managed with sleep, but the more you sleep, the hungrier and thirstier you get.
Hungry? Thirsty? Horny? The Atomic Wrangler has you covered.
Health works like in any other game. Let your biological needs unattended, get infected or shanked, and it drops. Stamina is an interesting one because it's tied to thirst. Stamina-intensive actions like running and fighting will make you thirsty, which will decrease your max stamina. Next up are immunity and reputation. Immunity is basically your resistance to the plague. Once it drops down to 0, you're infected. And trust me, you don't want to get infected. Immunity can be managed with various medicines and tinctures, or by wearing protective clothes, or simply avoiding contact with infected citizens. Fuck, why am I doing this to myself? Reputation is pretty straightforward. Ivan likes you, he'll trade with you. Ivan hates you, he'll shank you. It seems simple, but it goes deeper than this. Pathologic 2 takes place over 12 in-game days, which grow increasingly shorter. Each day brings a new set of quests and challenges. The things that you once took for granted may no longer be available. Prices skyrocket overnight. Grocery stores will suddenly refuse money and only accept coupons, which are near worthless. The fountains that were a reliable source of water in the early game, they're now infected or destroyed by looters. Speaking of which, why bother with shops? Isn't it easier to loot houses for valuables? Well, yes and no. People won't take too kindly to strangers breaking into their properties and stealing. Plague-infected houses, on the other hand, are fair game. The problem is that some of the contents are locked. You'll need lockpicks for doors and needles for drawers. However, lockpicks are expensive and hard to come by, while needles are needed for equipment repairs. On top of that, you're not the only one who's thought of that. Bandits will attack you on sight, and trust me, you don't want to get into fights. One way to mitigate the effects of the city's ever-shifting economy is by bartering. Each item has a value attached to it, and some citizens will only accept certain items in exchange. For example, guards will trade medicine and ammunition in exchange for lockpicks and sharp objects, most likely in an attempt to, prevent people from shanking each other and looting. But kids are dumb in this game. They'll trade the most valuable stuff for useless crap. Like, here's me trading a vial of morphine for a chestnut and a button. But there's a catch here. These mundane items can be obtained only via looting or scavenging, and as I've mentioned already, these are not always the safest activities. Also, bartering is not always reliable. Again, certain people will only trade for certain things depending on the day, which will force you to keep a steady supply of junk and trinkets just in case you're on the brink of starvation and a kid has an egg or whatever on him. You've never known what desperation is until the only thing standing between you and your impending death is a kid who'll only trade the last piece of pie in town for a fucking button. Or you could just say fuck it and harvest organs and steal shit. But remember, the more unscrupulous you become, the more dependent you'll be on the city's black market economy, because honest people will refuse to do business with you. So in Pathologic 2, you never feel entirely at ease, even in its brief and rare moments of respite. So I think that's it with the gameplay. Or is it? I must be forgetting something. What's that smell? Why are you wearing only one sock? Am I seriously trying to have a conversation with a bull? Why are you naked? Did this kid just put a hit on another kid? yeah, I'm not quite done yet. Pathologic 2 is above all else an expertly crafted exercise in player disempowerment. The survival meters I've talked about earlier are just half the story. On their own, they're just numbers and sliders. What gives them weight is the way they are implemented and contextualized, both narratively and mechanically. See, you're not a superhero, you're just some guy. You're just as likely to starve to death or get infected as anyone else. So naturally you must do anything you can to survive. At the same time you're a surgeon and most likely the town's best bet to survive the plague. Pathologic 2 is a constant balancing act. Players are forced to balance their personal human needs against the needs of the community. This can entail easing a victim's pain with your sole antibiotic or giving a sick kid your precious immunity booster. As a doctor, you're required to do your daily rounds at the hospital. Tasks can vary from treating to diagnosing a certain number of patients, but the hospital is constantly understocked, so it's up to you to obtain what's necessary to perform your duties. Are you willing to do what it takes to treat your patients? Which can involve selling your valuables and food for a few measly antibiotics, which, by the way, won't cure them. You're just increasing their chances at survival, or, to put it nihilistically, delaying the inevitable. And while all this is happening, your survival meters are constantly ticking down. On top of that, the world moves independently of you. Quests are available only for a limited amount of time, and the game gives you more quests than you could possibly accomplish in one day. So you need to start prioritizing. You can't save everyone. You can't do every quest. That pair of leather boots that you eyed in the shop might not be there the next day. There's no right or wrong decision in Pathologic 2, just shades of shitty. The fucked up thing is that having so much freedom in terms of how to approach situations feels suffocating. Regardless of my tight rationing skills or how much I struggle to save this fucking shithole, it doesn't matter that much. My friends will get infected. Even if I selfishly hoard all the food and antibiotics this side of the Volga River, my survival is still not guaranteed. I'm just some guy in his late 20s fighting the deadliest plague in human history. A disease that can take the form of moving, almost sentient disease clouds. Like, who the fuck do I think I am? This is way above my pay grade. As gamers, we are conditioned to expect certain things from our games. We expect the combat to be fluid and responsive. We want our quests to have neat and satisfying resolutions. But Pathologic 2 takes all of those things and turns them on their fucking head. The combat is awkward and unresponsive. Fights can be over in a matter of seconds and they can go either way. That is, when you're fighting one guy, you can maybe take on 2 guys, if you're lucky. But 5? Nah. No way you're getting alive out of that one. I've read a lot of pieces bashing the game for its janky combat. I have a few things to say about that. Like, the entire game is framed and designed to be a deconstruction of modern gameplay tropes. For example, take the way it deals with death. Every time you die, you're transported to the theater, where Russian Jared Leto berates and punishes you for being so shit at the game. These punishments can include penalties to max health, increasing the rate of hunger and exhaustion, and others. And these consequences stack and apply retroactively to all saves, so no scumming. You're stuck with your decisions. But while the game scolds you for failing, at the same time it expects you to fuck up. Failing is a part of the experience. It can lead to some of the most interesting story outcomes. It's like the devs are trying to establish this very weird and at the same time playfully sadistic dynamic between the player and the game. It's very hard to describe in words, it's kind of funny in a way. So with that in mind, it only makes sense that the combat is as unfair and clunky as it is. And to be honest, you're fighting 5 guys, so what the fuck did you expect? Now, the questing system is another area where Pathologic 2 subverts expectations. You know how open world games flood you with tasks that feel more like chores than actual quests? Pathologic 2 has quests, but it's like, you know, you don't have to do all the quests, you know? If you don't feel like it. Well, it's not like you'd have time to do all of them, but, you know, just saying, man. Chill. But you see, I can't fucking chill, because my brain, after years of playing Ubisoft-style open-world games, chimps out every time I see an unsolved quest in the journal. What's genius about Pathologic 2's approach to quests is not that they have time limits, rather that some of them can be solved by doing nothing, like just deadass letting them gather dust in the mind map, which is another genius idea that I don't have the time to cover in this video. Other quests, like the ones related to finding a cure to the plague, lead nowhere. They just end and you get no reward. It makes sense when you think about it. The quest led to a dead end, so logically it's only natural that you don't get anything. What impressed me the most about Pathologic 2 is how the mechanics, as well as the sense of helplessness in the face of uncontrollable chaos conveyed by them, tie not only into the story itself, but in the way it's framed. Pathologic 2 is in many ways Russian Fargo. Hear me out. Pathologic 2 and Fargo, and I'm talking here both about the film and the TV series, have many themes in common, like audience subversion, miscommunication, reality versus fiction, and the fact that we're basically at the whim of fate. There is also something to be said about how Pathologic 2 treats the tragedy and senseless violence of its world. It's part melodramatic, part satirical. I couldn't help but notice a layer of dark comedy enveloping the writing. Characters range from tragic to cartoonishly corrupt and buffoonish. For instance, Big Vlad, the city's leading industrialist and overall the richest man in town, is portrayed both as a caring and paternal figure, as well as a ruthless opportunist who exploits his workers for personal gain. Saburov is a conservative local official who will do anything it takes, including pinning the murder of Artemy's father on the wrong person, as long as the status quo is preserved. This ties into another Pathologic 2 theme, which is the conflict between old and new. The town has three leading families, each with their own ideologies and opinions on how the city should be run. There's a fourth faction comprised of the kin, the indigenous people of the steppe, who find themselves in the unenviable position of having to adapt to the new world to survive, but at the cost of their culture being assimilated. Another theme that Pathologic 2 and Fargo share is the absurd. That basically people will do stuff, things will happen, and you have no power over them. Events will play out in a certain way no matter how much you fight against the whims of fate. So you're just an actor playing his part. And what do you know, the story is framed as a stage play. The writing is purposefully poetic and almost musical in rhythm. The towering bird people I mentioned above are stagehands of some sort. Every night the theater holds a surreal play that foreshadows the events of the next day. Tragedians, the creepy mimes, act as reflections of the characters' thoughts and tutorial figures. Pathologic 2 doesn't clarify if the events of the game are real or part of some sort of elaborate stage play directed by Mike Immortal. The lines between reality and fiction are constantly shifted and blurred. Whether you play as Artemy or a character playing the role of Artemy is also left up to interpretation. And to be honest, no matter how much you try to dissect every little detail, it doesn't really matter in the end. What matters is that by framing the story and the world itself as a stage play, there's more space for the surreal and crazy shit to shine. And they never get old. So that's my take on Pathologic 2. This was a hard script to write, probably the toughest given the mechanical complexity of Pathologic 2. I have to be honest, I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did, and I look forward to playing the other two characters. I might make a separate video covering their roots, but we'll see. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. If you wanna say hi, I'm on that bird chirpy thing all the cool kids are using. I'll see you next time.